But it's swirl, you know, this pussy's nothing, all over the world. It has it any other way. I'm one of the girls. We hardly get a red bitch, spell it in her. T-R-A-N-N-Y. Daddy chill, I'm one of the guys. Between my thighs, say it louder. Optimus Prime.
Just love me. Ugly hoes hate me. I'm not busy hating. I'm flying across the country to be in vogue, bitch.
Ladies and gentlemen, Okama and Weebs, my name is Bridget Empire, science and culture correspondent for Teaboo newspaper The Daily Telegraph. More often than not, my job is trying to convince you of the facts. But today, I'm not here to do that. Today, I want to present something that, in my heart, I am absolutely certain of, but something I'm almost certain will never be confirmed. A headcanon of mine regarding a hit Japanese pirate franchise about freedom, anti-fascism, and being a silly rubber man who loves meat and friendship that I absolutely ride or die for, but I'm almost certain will never be put into text. And one that many of you might disagree with. Maybe vehemently. I'm also here to argue for the freedom of everyone to have headcanons, but mostly for my own, because I'm obsessed with it. I'm here today to present the case for the main thing I can't stop thinking about when watching or reading the hit Japanese story One Piece. That being that this man right here, Sanji Vinsmoke, is a trans woman.
It should have been me, not him! It's not fair!
Okay, stop booing me. I know. You like Sanji because he shows you a different way to be a man. You like Sanji because you're a misogynist and you think that he's a borderline sex pest, despite the fact that Sanji would kick your ass for thinking that. Those are both valid. Well, one's more valid than the other. Live and let live. But just for a second, humour me here. Why is it okay that so many people break their own backs trying to justify headcanons about just about everything in their favourite stories? But the idea that a character in one of their favourite shows is trans is beyond the pale. Sit with that for a second, because I think any argument you might be about to make would ring true for your weird shipping dreams, or your power scaling obsession, or your prediction for how One Piece ends, especially if one of these people that thinks that Zoro's going to kill Luffy at the end. Like, have you read this? Have you watched this? This man is ride or die for Luffy. The only difference is that you don't want to see the image of the character you like change, even though One Piece is already full of trans people. So it's not like it wouldn't be without precedent even. You've always seen Sanji as Mr. Toxic Masculinity, and as many Reddit posts have told me, Sanji being trans would be a betrayal of his entire character. But would it? Or are you just a little bit, maybe, just a tiny bit, transphobic? Now don't attack me, hear me out. You've known Sanji for years, grown up with him maybe. When you picture him in your head, you picture a man. You never saw the signs. It just doesn't make sense. Can't he just stay a man? Can't he just be a guy with feminine hobbies? How can he be a woman? He likes girls. For all you cis people watching, those are all the same things trans people hear from people in their lives when we come out. Denial is strong. People have an idea deep in their heads of who someone is. It's hard to change that. But it doesn't mean that you can't. And it doesn't invalidate the transness of the subject of your denial. For all people in the fandom deny it, the signs are there. As a trans person, I see them all laid out. Need I play that scene where Sanji is finally happy for the first time when he gives up on his performed masculinity and is allowed to just be feminine? Need I point out that in Whole Cake Island, Sanji makes it clear that his whole ladies man bit is just part of an act? A facade he puts on to look more happy-go-lucky and hide his inner pain? Need I remind you that Punk Hazard happened? I'm not saying I'm right. As I said up front in this video, I'm pretty sure Oda will never make this canon. But it reads that way to me, as a trans woman. I see a lot of myself in Sanji. Well, the parts that aren't horrific. And before I saw Whole Cake Island, I genuinely never thought I would say that, even though I thought he was a closeted trans woman for a lot longer. Trans women, when they're deep in denial, will often overemphasize their masculine qualities to try and fix themselves, or not to give themselves away to others, to keep from being hurt. They might get ridiculously strong to cope. They might overemphasize their attraction to women to the point where it could never be questioned. They might grow a ratty denial beard, or pretend that they hated every second they spent with anyone even vaguely gender non-conforming. Oh, that time I was stuck on an island with a bunch of trans people and they made me dress like a girl? That was hell. I fucking hated that. Terrible. Don't check the footage. Don't check the fucking footage.
今俺キャーってそんなわけでも何なのこの感情わけわかんない私もう自分でなくなっちゃいそう戻さな夢の時は終わった
My biggest feeling is that I get anxious about other people's queer headcanons, specifically regarding characters who I headcanon as asexual. Which, you know, now that I'm not a teenager, I mostly keep to myself, because there's no reason for us to yuck each other's yum, but it's a thing. And I don't like it when people ship an entire ensemble cast with each other, e.g. the Sailor Moon team. My take, literally everyone is gay for Haruka and Michiru, regardless of their other interests. Usagi is fully bisexual, but also deeply compet. Rei is ace. Ami and Makoto are extremely into men, regardless of other interests. I'm agnostic about Chibiusa and Hotaru. I also think Sam is bisexual and Frodo is asexual, and they both understand and are happy with the situation. Gives me the willies when people make Frodo gay. Not because of gayness, but because of Frodo. But it makes them sad when I say so I just don't. I know some of you aren't as in touch with fandom conversations as the average One Piece fan. That's okay. I'm here to help bring you up to speed. A headcanon, you see, is an idea for a character or plot in a story that hasn't happened on the screen or on the page. In my head, you see, it's canon. So no, Oda hasn't literally said on the page that Sanji, controversial yet beloved character from hit manga and anime series One Piece, is transgender. But there are so many clues that point to that conclusion that in my head, and in the head of many others on the internet, it's canon. Sanji's character is very strange without it, in my opinion, and him being a closeted trans person is the glue that sticks all of that weirdness together. The overcompensated masculinity, the kindness paired with the abrasiveness of his character, his softness towards women that borders on creepy while he struggles to relate to men, you know. I'd rather he wasn't creepy, but we can't have everything we want. And some trans people are perverts. Some people in every group are. It doesn't change the fact that to me, this character reads as trans. And I'm not the only one. I've seen this argument pop up many times online, only for it to be shouted down by anime redditors or online misogynists, who for some reason think that they're big fans of Sanji, but act in a way that would get them a swift kick in the face from Zoro's least favourite cook.
この方々はルフ太郎さんのお仲間の方たちですか
なんて可憐なレディーメロメロメロメロメロメロ
For those of you who require a quick rundown on One Piece to get you up to speed, One Piece tells the story of Monkey D. Luffy, a pirate and anarchist who ate a fruit that gave him Mr. Fantastic powers, who gathers a crew of equally iconic and lovable comrades to join him on his pirate ship to go find a legendary treasure known as the One Piece, and to go from island to island punching fascists and miscellaneous dickheads in the face. Sanji joins Luffy's crew pretty early on as the ship's cook, and is a suit-wearing, breakdance-fighting master chef, who is hostile to men but would do anything for women, with both good and sometimes less than good implications. He's also hinted heavily to be a trans woman in the closet, or at least that potential is played for laughs on occasion, to the point where, over the course of an extremely long series, those occasional gags become a pattern. A pattern that, as a trans viewer of the show, becomes slowly undeniable. Headcanons aren't limited to weird internet queers like me, however. Headcanons have been a feature in fandom for years, if not centuries. For literal decades, Star Wars fans argued fervently about whether Han Solo or Greedo shot first in Han's introductory scene in the original movie, until George Lucas ruined everyone's fun by making the special editions and taking away any ambiguity whatsoever. Many mystery stories and prestige dramas have open endings, which leave some room for interpretation. Whatever you think happened to Tony Soprano after the screen cut to black in the Sopranos finale is your personal headcanon. It'll never be confirmed, but it's how you understand the story, and the way it left you to put the pieces together when it ended. Hell, you could take this all the way back to the origin of the term canon in the first place, referring to the official doctrine of the church. You could, however much you might get burned at the stake for suggesting it, posit that every branch of Christianity is its own headcanon, since they all have their own canon. Not all of them can be right, but they all fervently believe in their specific interpretation of church doctrine. Now, before I burst into flames at the sheer heresy of uttering these words in a Catholic country, let me make it clear that this video is not about canon as in Catholic versus Protestant, but about how I built this headcanon. That Sanji, the chef and weird Power Ranger child from One Piece, is just like me for real. In a trans way, that is. And through this journey, I hope that some of you who vehemently disagree with my interpretation of the character can understand how I got there, and through that understanding, can gain a deeper appreciation for how we all take different things away from stories. And perhaps get a little less mad next time you hear someone say something about a character from a story you love that makes no sense to you. Two people can read the same book and get two completely different things out of it, even down to individual scenes or characters. Who shot first, Greedo or Han? Who was right in Marvel Civil War, Steve or Tony? Did Gandalf just refuse to summon the Eagles to get them straight to Mount Doom because he was fucking with them? Because he couldn't, or because he just forgot? I mean, he's old as fuck, you never know.
Not listening. Not listening.
I also hold that the entire cast of Saints Row 4, except Zinyak, are bisexual, and same goes for Fast and Furious, because it's the same thing, just not in space. Also, Zinyak is a space gay. But he's a fasci assimilationist dipshit who can't yet understand why nobody likes him. You might have noticed by now that throughout this video, starting with, well, before this point, I've been including some controversial headcanons from fellow creators that I solicited. I put out a call and people responded, because many of us have headcanons that contradict canon, or are, at the least, denied by the larger fandom of the media. This is nothing new. It's been years since Tumblr made Super Wholock a massive deal in internet fandom subcultures, the fantasy world that combined the worlds of Supernatural, Doctor Who and Sherlock. Obviously, nothing that people made up about Super Wholock was canon. But did it have to be? When people know certain characters inside out, playing with them in stories like a child might play with action figures to tell a story is a fun and harmless way to explore aspects of your own identity without being judged for it. Hell, half the reason AO3 exists at all is exactly for stuff like this. If you're struggling with your sexuality, it might help to write a few stories where characters that you know like the back of your hand explore theirs, and see how that makes you feel. This does nothing to harm the characters, they're not real. It's not being sold to a mainstream market, it's just for you, and other people like you, to explore avenues of themselves and others, to explore human existence through a common language. The language, in this case, of alternate canon stories. My controversial headcanon? Spurk. I prefer Spork, but okay. It's actually canon, based on moments from TOS. I say Kirk and Spock have a romantic relationship that's non-sexual and open, or Kirk thinks they have an open romantic non-sexual relationship, and Spock is only occasionally reminded of the delusion, secretly delighting in finding subtle ways to disappoint Kirk without disobeying orders.
Thanks, Jim. It's good to have a friend like you.
Strange, that's the way I feel about you too, my dear friend Spock.
Lest we forget, without this kind of queer headcanoning, we never would have gotten Star Trek The Next Generation. Kirk and Spock shippers re-sparked interest in Trek as a franchise after the initial cancellation of the original series, and the Kirk-Spock shipping fanfiction was so widespread and popular that it's often credited with giving rise to slash fiction as a genre. From the moment fan communities found each other, whether via pen and paper or over a Tumblr dashboard, there have been queer ships, exploration of queer identities via established characters, and more. And what's more, this not only didn't hurt the properties in question, it made them exponentially more popular. Would Doctor Who and Sherlock have taken off overseas like they did, without the fandoms headed by largely American audiences who loved writing in those worlds, exploring the queer subtext in these shows in a way the actual shows never did? I don't think so. And so for those of you who are still skeptical, let me just say, without queer headcanons, we'd never have gotten Star Trek The Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, or any of the other Star Trek series that have gone down as some of the best science fiction shows of all time. Queer headcanons, queer fandoms, explorations of established characters, these are all great for the art form and for individual properties. Thirsty gays may well have saved Star Trek, so please forgive me as I continue to explain why I am convinced that Sanji, Mr. Prince of all people, a name that definitely isn't overcompensating or anything, to me, is a trans woman. Weeb audience. We'll make some angry and some happy. Guts and Griffith are queer as hell, absolutely did the thing. DJ Moore did a great video on it you might have seen, but it's virtually undeniable, but remains controversial among uncritical anime fans who see the show as edgy boy with big swords cuts up demons, but stops their understanding there. Now, I know what you're thinking. Isn't Sanji that weird pervert man? Didn't Sanji have a whole storyline about him being so transphobic that he learned to fly just to get away from some Attack on Titan looking crossdressers? Isn't the whole point of Sanji that he's a man who has a traditionally feminine job? Well, yes and no to all three of those, but we will address them all. For now though, I'd like to counter with this. When I last made the case for Sanji possibly being a trans woman, I was assured that when I got through Whole Cake Island, I would properly understand Sanji's character and regret my words and deeds. Instead, I was treated to the startling realization that Sanji has the backstory of a literal Disney princess, albeit a Disney princess who has fascist Power Rangers for a family instead of some snarky stepsisters, and a Disney princess who's extremely horny for women. But you know, we have Elsa now, so that's not so unusual. On top of that though, into my growing list of evidence that Sanji is trans, comes this Steven Universe-ass plot about him being the one to inherit his mother's kindness, his mother's humanity, and, looking at the two of them side by side, his mother's looks as well. Sanji, in canon, carries on his mother's spirit. Yes, this is all beautiful, whatever you think of my admittedly controversial headcanon about Sanji's gender identity, but as Violet says in Dressrosa, Sanji has a pink mind. He doesn't think like other men. They, according to her, are all liars. Sanji is different. He's not like the other guys. He's a girl.
母さんの命がけの抵抗で守られた感情を持って生まれてきた子それがあなたサンジだからあなたは誰よりも優しいのよ
When Kuma scatters the Straw Hat Pirates across the world, he sends them all to somewhere they can get what they need to improve. Somewhere they, deep inside, want to be. For whatever reason, Sanji gets sent to an island literally run by a gender-fluid revolutionary with the power to transgender. In fact, Sanji's kick-based fighting style is exclusively practiced by Ivankov's newcomer and the Acolytes, mixing martial arts and ballet. It requires a body and mind that can break free from strict gender roles to bring its true strength out. Sanji switches bodies with a woman and begs to stay in it, crying that the dream is over when he returns. Sanji is a trans woman. How am I the only one seeing this? And is it okay that I do? When so many people clearly do not. What is the power of a headcanon, especially for marginalised people? And does it even matter if Oda never makes trans Sanji canon? Even though, let's be real, the signs are all there. He's a Disney princess.
処方されたでも母さんはその後父の野心を阻止するために薬を飲んだ
おい何をしているそら
操作された血統因子に影響を及ぼすほどの劇薬を
So, what's in a headcanon? Well, headcanons have existed for as long as there have been stories, and trans headcanons, while not as well documented, have been around for a long while. In fact, on a topic that might well get its own video one day, the main character of Metroid, Samus Aran, has long been thought to be trans by many of the trans gamer community. In fact, Hirofumi Matsuoka, one of the people who worked on Samus's original design, told the writers of the Japanese Super Metroid Strategy Guide in 1994 that Samus was a new half, this being a somewhat problematic term for a trans woman that's still packing, if you know what I mean. I know Sanji would, because we all saw how he reacted to Kiku, and honestly, I completely get it. As a woman pushing 6 foot tall, if I saw an 8 foot tall trans woman, I would go out of my fucking mind. I'd be Fishman Island Sanji levels of down bad in an instant. Kiku aside, this has not been, and will probably never be confirmed by Nintendo specifically, who are very insistent on keeping a family-friendly image, having done away with a trans backstory for their bizarre Birdo character in the Mario franchise, a monster who's basically Yoshi but with a big gate, or with the character of Vivian in Paper Mario, whose transness was erased in the localization, but is explicitly a trans character in the original Japanese version of The Thousand Year Door. Creators can much more easily add queer subtext, or their own headcanons of characters' transness, than get official approval from parent companies. Whether that be Nintendo in the case of Samus, a character originally intended to be trans, at least by one of their creators, or Oda himself in the case of One Piece, which has a ton of trans characters already, from Ivankov to Inazuma, to Bon Clay to Kiku to Yamato, who I will get to, because I could feel 1,000 people getting furious on the other side of the screen at the mere suggestion that Yamato might be trans. Hold off on that feeling. I have things to say about that. What I'm getting at is that there's a line between what a creator might intend for a character and what might end up being the final version. Even when a creator might design a character to not be trans, it might change during the telling of the character's story, to the point where the creator themselves is convinced. Or, in a long-running series, where lots of things happen to a lot of characters, a group of people on the other side of a screen might see something in a character that was put there for a gag, or not intended to be anything but an odd character detail, and see something more. And the more they pull that thread, the more they find that it fits. While the information about the new half history of Samus Aran is out there are far more people that deny this aspect of Samus's character than accept it. And I bet that's true even in the trans community. But that doesn't stop it being there. And inversely, even if it had never been said by anyone, never mind one of the original creators of the character, there would still be people who would insist on headcanoning Samus-Aran as trans. Because she's a tall, badass woman who likes shooting things and wearing heavy armor. The existence of this headcanon might be regarded with more validity in certain circles because it has backing and evidence from Samus' creators, but people get different things out of the same piece of art all the time. It doesn't mean one person's takeaway is less valid than the other. I might watch, say, Vinland Saga, and tell you that it's an incredible story about why capitalism and white supremacy is bad, and you might watch Vinland Saga and say, it's a badass tale about Vikings with PTSD. We're both right, but we both got different things out of that experience. In the same vein, we can both see the textual evidence for, say, Yamato being trans, and I bring this up because there's a lot more explicit evidence here than the subtext that I've gathered to make this case for Sanji, and I might say, that's a trans man in a closed-off society with no access to hormones and no Ivankov to sneakily trans your gender. I base this on Yamato repeatedly using male pronouns, calling himself Kaido's son, Kaido calling him his son, everyone around Kaido calling Yamato his son, despite Yamato's flashbacks explicitly showing that he went by Kaido's daughter as a child, showing very clearly that he used the idea of Kozuki Oden as a means through which to self-actualize, and you might say, oh, but the Viva card said Yamato as a girl. Now, since Oda never explicitly came out and pointed a giant arrow at Yamato and said, this is a grown-ass man, I guess I can forgive you for not buying it. But he went in the men's only bath at the end of Wano, with Kiko going in the women's bath to show you explicitly, this is a trans woman, this is a trans man. I need to put this on the table, because some of you people I truly don't understand. I've seen people denying Kiko is trans, just how? And I'm weird for thinking that maybe possibly someday Sanji might come out. Kiku is out, in canon, so is Yamato, and, as much as it pains me to say that, you can have that. I think you're wrong. I think you have to willfully ignore the entirety of their characters to deny the transness of Yamato and Kiku. But if you're left with any doubt, then I guess you could make the argument that Oda should have been more clear. But then again, there are still people that argue Bridget from Guilty Gear isn't trans, so clearly some of you are just in denial because you're transphobic and can't bear to live with the idea of living in a world where some characters in the media you like are trans. In fact, a lot of this reminds me of the denial of the canon ending of Kill la Kill, which ends with Ryuko being asked on a date by her female best friend and her saying yes. Now, if you didn't know this ending was coming, this might feel like it comes out of nowhere, but the creators have since confirmed that yes, this was meant to be a relationship. Ryuko is queer, and yet to this day, legions of fans deny this. Some of these being the same people that try and grasp at straws to claim that Yamato isn't canon. In fact, one of the creators I contacted about controversial headcanons came forward with Ryuko being queer as a contribution. And yeah, it is controversial, because a huge part of the anime fandom just can't stand the idea that something they might have enjoyed might have featured one of those damn homosexuals. I don't know if it's controversial, but I'm convinced Ryuko Matsui from Kill la Kill is queer, and nobody can tell me otherwise. Gender goals, to be honest. As a trans girl, it's so easy for me to layer a trans storyline onto her. And the whole show is about gaining power by exposing your true self in spite of everyone initially gawking at you, and seeing you as deeply unserious because of your willingness to forgo the role society expects of you. Like, I don't know how people still tell me this is a fan service show. Either way, I think Oda was plenty clear. And honestly, at a certain point, denying the weight of textual evidence that Yamato is trans is just transphobia. Especially so with Kiku. Like, if Oda made 1,000,000 pages saying for certain Sanji was cis, I'd be like, yeah, okay, fair. And to be fair, I think I'm really going off on a limb with the Sanji thing. I think it's fine that people think my headcanon that one day Sanji might maybe, possibly be revealed to be closeted is odd. That's fine. I don't think it's as odd as denying someone that's out, because being out is a very conscious decision. Whereas being closeted can be passive. Sure, sometimes people have to make a conscious effort to stay in the closet, but if you're not out to yourself, if you're yet to admit you're trans, whether because you don't have all the information you need, because you've never met another trans person before, so have no reference to what a trans person even is, or just because of the shame, you're going to come across as cis to most people. For a long time. I did for 24 years. And yet looking back, all the signs were there. As they are with Sanji. Speaking of shame, in Whole Cake Island, we see the way shame is an integral part of Sanji's childhood. He's shamed for not being as strong as his brothers, for being a crybaby, for having caring instincts, for liking cooking, for being too much like his mother. He turns to his mother and sister constantly, and just relates to them more, even getting imprisoned for being a disappointment to his father. When Judge Vinsmoke wanted nothing more than 4 invincible sons, what would be more shameful than not only being emotional, being the weak one, than not being a son at all, and instead inheriting his mother's will. The concoction she drank to save her children from a life of emotionless soldiering, the only one of the four that inherited his mother's kindness. As Reiju, Sanji's sister, explains, Sanji's mother lives on in him. Her spirit, her kindness is Sanji. It's what makes him the way he is, what makes him want to take care of everyone, what makes him so protective of those he loves. We see this again in Kamabaka Kingdom, where Sanji, having given in and become one of the newcomer in makeup and women's clothes, relief on his face the first time in forever, sees in the newspaper that Luffy's brother is dead, that Luffy needs his help, and he shakes off any happiness he has, because to do his duty, in Sanji's mind, is to deny who he is. To protect those he loves and cares about, he needs to put on that costume, to be that totem of masculinity, someone with the power of his asshole family. Because until Whole Cake Island, when Luffy says straight up that everything Sanji's family hates about him is everything Luffy thinks makes him great, Sanji has believed, based on everything, that being true to himself is forbidden, is shameful. His true self can never be allowed to come to the surface.
飯先に従事し、王家のプライドはない。つまらぬ情に流され、弱者のために命を危険にさらすような脆弱な精神。びっくりした。なんであいつ急にお前のいいとこ全部言ったんだ？そういう意味で言ってねえだろ、あいつは。
And I get it. You can check my last One Piece video. I'm pretty open with the fact that I'm not a huge fan of Sanji's character at that point. And in my defense, I just got through Fishman Island and then Punk Hazard, so I had a good reason to be sick of that ex shit. But where I saw a lot that I didn't like before Whole Cake Island, in that arc, he makes it clear a lot of that is just a mask. And instead, we see someone who, like me, was mercilessly bullied for being effeminate, for not being strong, for having unconventional hobbies, for crying too often, for being caring and compassionate, with little interest in fighting or competing. He, just like me, for real. And if we're being real, Sanji was in Kamabaka Queendom for 2 years. There's no way Iwa didn't offer him that patented Ivankov female hormone, and given how Sanji reacts to being in a woman's body in Punk Hazard, you know he was having the time of his fucking life. Maybe one day we'll see some of that. Maybe we won't. Probably we won't. But I live in hope. Before I came out as a trans woman, I've read tons of gender-bending fanfiction. When I wrote stories, they dealt with themes of having your body being taken over by a foreign force, even subconsciously. I was always, whether I chose to or not, writing trans stories. I even wrote half a fantasy series set in an ancient Rome-inspired world where magical parasites overtook people and stole their identity from the inside out, and didn't put together that that was a trans story until about 3 chapters in. I'm not saying Sanji is a trans woman, but what I am saying is that I think Sanji as a character is very helpful for trans people and other queer people for understanding themselves. If someone sees something of themselves in him, it does not ruin him as a character. Someone else's interpretation of a character cannot and should not affect how you see them. And if it does, I think you should question why that is. But if Sanji's story helps more people realize they are trans, and if people are telling trans stories about Sanji, whether they're in their own heads or on AO3, I think that's amazing. And I think it's simultaneously therapeutic and artistic, to say nothing about what might actually happen in canon. At the same time, I completely understand that one of the appeals of Sanji as a character is that he's not a traditional male figure. He's the ship's cook. He's sensitive. Yes, he's horny as all hell, but he doesn't dare use his hands for fighting because they're for caring for others. I don't want to imply that you can't be a man and have these features, because of course you can. That's great, that's healthy, that should be expected, but that doesn't mean that his role is fixed. That doesn't mean other people can't have other interpretations of the character. I think anyone who's going to have a trans reading of Sanji, given the implications for the broadness of gender norms on display, is going to be 100% down with the idea that guys can, and should, take on caring roles, despite whatever society thinks. And if you deeply identify with Sanji, and you're not trans, that's okay. That doesn't mean I'm saying you're trans. And if you feel like it does, step back for a second and ask yourself why. Sanji is not you. This isn't a video essay about you. On the other hand, if some of this stuff hit quite close to home, it's not a bad thing for you to think about these things and entertain the idea. Hell, when I played Fire Emblem Awakening, I thought I might like men because Chrom made me feel warm inside, but it turns out men hit different when they're drawings instead of real people. But the questioning was healthy, and I came out of it a more fully rounded person for having explored that side of myself, as weird as that might sound. And as for the whole transphobic side story that sparked this whole headcanon for a lot of us in the first place, well... Where Sanji spends 2 years training on to become so transphobic that he learns how to fly just to get away from the trans lobby trying to transgender, and Sanji fights using his legs, which is lucky really, because the newcomer Kenpo has a similar style to his own, and they have a special hormone-infused food recipes, which he has to learn because he's the ship's cook, and fucking Sanji. Sanji's story is the dark stain on this whole queer masterpiece of a story right now, and that's a shame because when Sanji first met Bon-chan, he had no weird homophobic reaction to them. In fact, when Sanji arrives at this all-Okama island, he's persuaded to wear a dress and makeup because he has a girlish heart, something emphasized again in the Dressrosa arc, where he is described as having a pink mind. And when he is dressed up in girls' clothes and makeup, he describes himself as becoming someone else. And for the first time in pretty much the entire show, he looks happy. The entire rest of One Piece, unless Sanji's looking directly at a woman or occasionally talking to Luffy, he is scowling. But until he snaps out of his vacation as a girl once he hears of Luffy's fate following a major battle, he looks at peace for the first time in the show. And all this time he's hanging around with those transphobic joke characters. I was terrified coming into the show the entire time. These motherfuckers are drawn like the fucking giants from Attack on Titan. These are drawn to express horror, and this just rings hollow compared to the rest of One Piece's story. A trend that continues into the Fishman Island arc that follows Sanji leaving the Okama Island, where he has a physical reaction to having blood donated to him by two homophobic caricatures. It's weird, and it doesn't feel like the rest of the show. But this is all from Sanji's point of view, explicitly. And in my opinion, he has a lot of internalized transphobia to deal with. Hell, he spends half an arc trapped in Nami's body after this, and he's so happy to be in a woman's body, you might well call his emotions something akin to gender euphoria. And at the end of this story, he begs not to be changed back at the end. He's transgender. I still think about this a lot. Until recently, every time I looked in the mirror, I saw a face not unlike the horror movie newcomer Oda drew in this unfortunate part of the One Piece saga. I still think this whole thing was a bad idea on his part. Those drawings and the characterization of the residents of the Kamabaka Queendom were horrifically transphobic. But I can't pretend it didn't ring true for me in that sense. Sanji, as much as it's framed for laughs in an incredibly transphobic lens, is running from what he imagines he'd be if he gave in to his urges. I was absolutely terrified to transition for years because I just thought I'd look like a man in a dress. But even if some of you still think I do, I don't, and I'm happy with how I look. Many of us are frozen for years in fear that is built on shame, that we won't meet society's standards of femininity, that we'll be ostracized, bullied, attacked, that we'll stand up and leave ourselves open for mockery. We are all chased by this idea, by this fear. And as bad as it looks on the page, the more I think about it in terms of metaphor, the more and more it makes sense. I just wish it was drawn differently though, like fucking hell Oda, really? But the thing is, when we see these types of characters outside of Sanji's point of view, we see some of the greatest characters in the series. Fucking Bon Clay is non-binary and proud as hell, delivering some of the best lines in the series about gender to everyone and their mother's fucking delight. Ivankov is also incredible. And both she and Inazuma are both badass gender-fluid revolutionaries who are lovable as hell. Neither of them have anything you can hate about them. They're just heroes top to bottom, and they're magnetic on screen, especially Eva. So clearly Sanji's idea of what he'll become if he embraces his inheritance from his mother, his pink mind, his femininity, is probably not what he fears. But the fear and the shame chase him anyway, because he was raised on a diet of fear and shame. And no matter how much he grows as a person, his past still follows him, and whispers in his ear, as it does to all of us. His quest, his journey, especially during and following Whole Cake, is to overcome it, and allow himself to be truly free. Sort of like that's one of the key themes of One Piece as a whole, huh? Can you see now why this headcanon works for me, even if it doesn't work for you? You don't have to believe it, but is it so wrong if I do? A lot of people take this stuff very personally. I was so convinced of this that before my previous One Piece video, I was searching like crazy for like-minded people, only to find people over and over again suggesting the exact same thing, getting shut down on places like Reddit for being one of a million different slurs, or for betraying the very idea of Sanji as a character. As a trans person who had to watch a million different reactions to my coming out, that sounds pretty fucking familiar. And if we're laying all of our cards on the table, Sanji's reaction to being in Nami's body? Before I transitioned, I used to fantasize about that stuff all the time. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured myself opening them to find myself as a woman. And even just imagining it, everything felt more right. I used to wish for this nightly. You might even say that when I opened my eyes, or when I woke up, because this was just a recurring dream, and both the metaphorical and literal sense, that the dream was over, as Sanji would say. So, I'm going to play my strongest card here. Cis people would not react this way to being in the body of a different gender. I know because some of my best friends are cis. If you think you're a boy, and you would instantly be happy being in a girl's body, you might not be a boy. Now, I'm not saying Sanji is this way, because he's a fictional character, but one of the biggest signs you're trans is the blaring siren of a symptom that is literally yearning to be the opposite gender. That's like the definition of the textbook trans person. And that's not even getting into non-binary people. Like, there's a lot more ways you can be trans that might be less blaringly obvious. If being trans was so antithetical to the idea of Sanji's character, as the legions of screaming Reddit bros would like you to think, he would have been begging to leave Nami's body, not begging to stay. Straight men don't want to be women. They want to be with women. If you want to be a woman, you're probably not a man. And if I just got your attention with that, hi, we all start somewhere. Welcome to the community.
男の道をそれると女の道をそれると踏み外せぬは人の道
Having said all that, let me be clear. I'm not trying to take Sanji away from you. I can't do anything about that. But I fucking love One Piece, and I want to talk about this. From what I've seen from my obsessive Googling, a lot of other people want to as well. Let them. I'm not the only one that sees this. And none of us have the ear of Eiichiro Oda, so your boy is safe. Unless we're right, in which case you should really question why you have such a visceral reaction to the idea of a fictional character being trans. Because I can guarantee that you have trans people in your life, even if you don't know it. And if one of them were to trust you, to love you enough to come out to you, I know you'd want to be the kind of person who'd be there for them, who'd help them through it, who'd shield them from hatred and bigotry. Because that's what Sanji would do. And you're a Sanji fan, right? Headcanons are a form of play. There is a blurry line here when people are talking about historical figures, of course, and with living people, speculating on their identities can be seen as pretty inappropriate. But thinking about how Sanji's character lines up with the trans experience isn't the same as, say, arguing that Kurt Cobain is trans, for example. That would require a bunch of evidence, say, like all of the stuff Kurt wrote in his memoirs about being trans, but with fictional characters, you hurt no one. You just use the art to communicate yourself to others. And with Sanji, I think a lot of people can see parts of themselves in his character that might not have even been intentional on Oda's part, but nevertheless help them come to terms with themselves or others. It might help them understand a friend, or a family member, or it might just be a fun story to read. But ultimately, isn't the point of fiction to broaden our understanding, to communicate in a way that's not just a straight-up recollection of your day or a wish for something, but to describe a world inside your head and get people lost in it? For a whole universe you constructed to be understood by others, sometimes in wild and revelatory ways. If Han shot first, does that make him a more interesting character to you? In my eyes, the way it was initially treated as ambiguous makes the viewer treat him with more suspicion. It makes him potentially dangerous, a lovable rogue, as he is now known. The ambiguity in that initial scene is part of what people found so fascinating about the character, and that passion is reflected in the heated arguments people had about it over the years. If, at the end of The Sopranos, the family just has a quiet dinner and nothing happens, does the fact that the story ends in such a way where you are left wondering if danger was lurking around the corner matter? I think it very well might. At the end of The Sopranos, you are left with a feeling of unease, of paranoia. You can never know what's lurking around the corner. A dinner could be the place where you die, or it could just be a dinner. But what you take away from that scene shapes how you process this, how you feel about that last scene, how the ambiguity eats at you. That is the power of good storytelling. So, getting back to One Piece. If Sanji is trans, does that make him a worse character to you? If it does, I think you should question what makes you feel that way. If it's because it makes his feminine traits less subversive, I understand. But otherwise, I think you might be looking at something you might not be able to articulate. A feeling that you don't want to be relating to a trans person. Which is, in my mind, a lot of the reason people are so quick to find excuses as to why they believe that explicitly trans characters like Yamato, like Kiku, are not trans at all, but just pretending. I won't personally be affected at all if Sanji isn't trans. But in my head he is. I won't be offended if it never comes out. But to me, it makes so much of his character make sense in a way it just didn't click with me before. If your personal headcanons don't come true, will you see the story differently? Will it ruin the experience for you if it doesn't fit your expectations? Or does the fact that you were so invested in a story that your mind filled in gaps, made predictions, got attached enough to the characters to have petty fights with strangers on the internet about them, just show how wonderful the journey was, that it affected you to the point where you were invested enough to fight about it? Headcanons are a testament to truly great storytelling. If a creator can get people so emotionally involved in their world, they debate the facts of the story and its characters like a church council deciding whether to name a rogue sect heretical, they've touched people with their work in a way that few people can. That's the mark of a truly special story. A story that really meant something to its fans. In the same way, I hope that you can recognise that I would not be telling you about my headcanon here if One Piece hadn't deeply affected me as a series. If I hadn't spent countless hours thinking about it. In that way, even if you vehemently disagree, can you not at least see that it's because we both speak out of a place of love for the story? So, here's to a trans Sanji, or not. And here's to whatever you get out of these characters. I'm sure that's awesome too. Whatever you get out of this series, or out of any fiction, it lets us explore more sides to ourselves. Allows us a lens to think about how we see ourselves, each other, and humanity, and wider concepts besides. That's why I love stories. And I hope you do too. I hope you enjoyed mine. Maybe I'll hear one of yours someday. I hope I do. Until then, thanks for watching. Hey, thank you for watching this video all the way to the end. If you like this video, why not like it, leave a comment, subscribe, tell your friends about it. I am, unfortunately, quite poor right now. So if you have a few coins burning a hole in your pocket and you hate to see a tran like me down on her luck, why not help me out my massive fucking horrifying overdraft and send me some money? You can give one-time donations on Coffee or PayPal, links below as always, or better yet, send it to my Patreon where you get early videos, access to the members-only Discord, my Nintendo Switch friend code, and exclusive content, and your name read out at the end of each video, just like these lovely people. Vince Whitaker, Amelia Unchained, Sarah Rudston, Jason Haig of Frank McManus, Susan Foster, Helena, Sierra Whiskey, Orestria, Ali Catgill, Brian, John N, Scully, Jana, Lloyd Luciente, Jason Cribbett, Shield Dayton, Robin Podolsky, Exploding Turtle, Casual Observer, Terry Roberts, Manta Ray, Courtney Burmack, Sleepy Slug, Philippa Tabrogga, Soma Piglet, Brain Douche, Artie Wolf, Hayden Gaylor, Greg Noble, Deanna McMillan, Caroline Regalado, Alexandra Lilly, PJ Lisbrell, Howard Lott, Nerania Scarjan, and Joey Cobalt. Thank you all so much.